The year is 200 AD. In the heart of Rome, a new decree has just been issued by Emperor Septimius Severus, a law intended to restore dignity to the empire's crumbling morals. The edict is clear. It bans women from fighting in the arena. To the outside observer, this looks like an act of mercy, perhaps even progress. But for the women already trapped behind the walls of the gladiator schools, the Ludi, this decree is not a liberation. It is a death sentence. While the law forbids new recruitment, it offers no escape for those already bound by the iron-clad gladiator's oath. They remain the property of their owners, assets that can no longer be displayed for profit in combat. And for a female gladiator who refuses to fight, or worse, refuses to kill, the emperor's ban changes nothing. The penalty remains as it always has been: absolute, terrifying, and merciless. To understand their fate, we must first look at who these women were. The Romans called them Gladiatrices, or Ludia. They were a walking contradiction in Roman society, a source of deep fascination and profound revulsion. While male gladiators were seen as tragic figures of martial virtue, female fighters were viewed as a glitch in the natural order. They were women who had, in the eyes of Roman satirists like Juvenal, rejected their sex to don the helmet and grease, yet the crowds loved them. Poets wrote about them. Emperors like Nero and Domitian paraded them under torchlight. We have proof of their bravery etched in stone, like the relief of Amazon and Achilia, two women who fought to a standstill so impressive they were both granted an honorable release. But glory was the exception. For most, the arena was a machine that consumed them. Whether they were slaves sold to pay a debt, criminals sentenced to the schools, or thrill-seeking citizens addicted to the roar of the crowd, they all shared one thing: the oath, the sacramentum gladiatorum. It was a terrifying legal binding that stripped a human being of all rights. When a woman took this oath, she agreed to endure, to be burned, to be bound, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. It was a surrender of the self. A body became the property of the lanista, the trainer. He calculated the cost of her barley porridge, her medical care, and her oil against the profit she would bring in the sand. And the only way to repay that investment was to bleed. But what happened when the spectacle went wrong? The entire economy of the arena relied on the promise of death. The crowd didn't just pay to see fencing, they paid to see the moment of truth, the coup de grace. When a gladiator defeated an opponent, they looked to the editor of the games for the signal missio, mercy, or police verso, the turned thumb of death. If the order came to kill, the victor was expected to drive the blade home without hesitation. This was the core of the gladiator's professional duty. But sometimes, in the heat of the dust and noise, a fighter would freeze. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was a flicker of recognition in the eyes of the woman kneeling before her. If a female gladiator refused to deliver the killing blow, she wasn't just breaking the rules of a sport, she was stealing from the mob. The reaction was instant. The Roman crowd, usually so eager for blood, would turn into a single terrifying organism of rage. They viewed a refusal to kill not as mercy, but as cowardice, a confirmation of the weakness they believed was inherent in women. For the Lannister and the game sponsors, a defiant gladiator was a dangerous liability. If one woman defied the order to kill, others might follow. The illusion of absolute control would shatter. Therefore, the punishment had to be swift, and it had to be more horrific than the combat itself. The moment she lowered her sword in defiance, she ceased to be a gladiator. She lost the protection of her armor and her status. She became loxiai, a condemned criminal. The transition from warrior to victim happened in seconds. Guards would swarm the sands, disarming the woman who had just moments ago been the star of the show. She would be dragged from the arena floor, not to the infirmary, but to the holding cells deep beneath the amphitheater, into the suffocating dark of the hypogeum. There, she would wait for the midday games. Roman spectacles were strictly organized. Beast hunts in the morning, gladiatorial combat in the afternoon. But the lunch hour, the meridiani, was reserved for the executions. It was a time for the cleaning of the trash. where the state disposed of rebels, runaways, and now the gladiator who refused to fight. The methods of execution were designed to be theatrical. The Romans were not content with simple capital punishment. They wanted a story. A female gladiator who refused to kill might be stripped of her armor, leaving her in a simple tunic or entirely naked, a final humiliation to strip away her martial identity. She might be bound to a stake in the center of the burning sands. Then the trapdoors would open. The Romans used starvation to weaponize nature. Lions, bears, or leopards, kept hungry for days in the dark, would be released into the blinding light. For the condemned woman, bound and weaponless, the only defense was to pray for a quick end. The crowd watched this not as a tragedy, but as a comedy of justice, a correction of the social order. Sometimes the cruelty was even more creative. The editors of the games loved to reenact mythology. They would turn the execution into a play. A woman who refused to shed blood might be cast in the role of a tragic mythological figure. She might be dressed in costume and forced to play the role of Dais, tied to the horns of a wild bull, and dragged to death while the audience applauded the realism of the performance. Or she might be forced into a mockery of combat, handed a wooden sword, and told to defend herself against fully armored male executioners. The crowd would laugh as she parried desperately with a toy weapon against real steel, prolonging the inevitable until the final stroke. Burning was another favorite method for those who defied the sacred oath. The Romans viewed fire as a purifying element. A gladiator who broke her contract might be tunicked in a garment soaked in pitch or resin. Tied to a stake, she would be set alight. This was often done at night or during the intervals to serve as a literal torch, illuminating the arena for the spectators. The smoke would choke the screams and the lanista would watch from the sidelines, a grim reminder to his other fighters of the price of disobedience. It was a cold economic calculation, destroy the defiant asset to ensure the obedience of the rest. When Emperor Severus issued his ban in 200 AD, this machinery of death didn't stop, it accelerated. The ban created a crisis for the owners of female gladiators. Suddenly, they held expensive stock that was illegal to use in fair combat. They couldn't train them and they couldn't fight them. So, many owners chose to liquidate their assets. Historical records suggest a spike in executions during this transition period. Women who had trained for years to be skilled fighters were sold off to brothels, sent to labor camps in the mines, or simply thrown into the arena one last time. Not as gladiators, but as fodder for the beasts to recoup a final few coins of profit. The few who survived the arena found that the ban offered no true freedom. To leave the gladiator school, you had to buy your contract, a sum impossible for a slave to earn without prize money. Many of these women, who had once heard the roar of thousands chanting their names, vanished into the silent misery of the Roman underworld. Some likely chose suicide, taking control of their own death rather than letting the empire dictate it. Others disappeared into history, their names erased, their armor melted down, their stories unwritten. Today, the archaeological trail goes cold right around the early 3rd century. The oil lamps and figurines depicting female fighters stop appearing, the inscriptions cease. It is as if they never existed. But the amphitheaters still stand. If you walk the floor of the Colosseum today, or stand in the ruins of the Ludus, you are standing on the ground where they made their choice. We often romanticize the gladiators as heroes of resistance, but the reality was far bleaker. They were cogs in a machine of blood. The tragedy of the female gladiator who refused to fight is not just a story of ancient cruelty, it is a mirror. It asks us how a society can become so desensitized that the torture of a human being becomes a lunch-hour distraction. It reminds us that for the Roman crowd, the woman who showed mercy was the villain, and the system that killed her was just. As we look back at them, we must wonder, amidst the roaring thousands, was there ever a single person who stayed silent? A single spectator who looked at a woman lowering her sword and saw bravery instead of weakness? The history books do not say. All that remains is the silence of the ruins and the ghost of a refusal that cost everything.